I need to have family members come in and help take care of this infant, and admitting that I need help and I need sleep doesn't mean that I am a failure as a mother. We're designed to do it all by ourselves. But we're not. And it's okay to, and if you don't have the family structure, maybe you have a friend structure or a community structure of saying, I desperately need to have help. Or when your body is sick and somebody needs to take care of an infant, you can find someone to reach out to and to help take care of your kids. And you're not a failure.
Welcome to the Motherhood Clinic, a podcast about caring for mothers after childbirth, led by clinical experience and real life stories. If you're a new mom and ever asked yourself, is what I'm going through normal? Should I be worried? Or who should I ask for help? This podcast is for you. It's for anyone navigating those early weeks, months, or even years after having a baby. Each episode brings together voices from across the motherhood journey, from clinicians, experts, and mothers from all walks of life. We're here to help you feel more empowered in your unique motherhood journey. We believe in a better start to motherhood.
Kayla, welcome back to the second episode of this three-part trilogy in talking about Don't Be an Athena. We've just been talking about Kansas barbecues, so I'll try not to get sidetracked thinking about barbecue. But what I want to do is quickly reintroduce you, Kayla, and the reason we're talking. In the first episode, I outlined my first interest in the conversation, where you are a TED speaker. You've written a book called Don't Be an Athena. Now, the first conversation we had really rested around the story of Medusa and Athena and the central theme around judgment, right? And how we unknowingly judge other people and kind of persecute them as a result, knowingly or unknowingly, and how sometimes you as the person being judged, the power that can have over you unintentionally, and how that affects you, whether that's motherhood, whether it's teenage motherhood, whether it's any level of adversity. It takes a level of strength to be aware of that, but then there is hope that you can overcome that. So that's really, I guess, hopefully a much deeper book, but the central theme. So we talked about that at an individual level. What is the impact that our judgment has to other people, to ourselves, and on us, right? And now we wanted to turn this conversation, bringing it from the individual to more of a group or society level. And there's a couple of conversations I'd like to have with you today. One is like looking at what happens when the whole structure acts like an Athena, right? So we feel dismissed, it's fragmented, it's slow. And whether that happens at a community level, right? We feel judged because of our ethnicity, our religion, our family, our community that unknowingly do this, and what the impact has at a society level on us, and how do we make a choice to overcome that. But there's also at a healthcare level. So looking at our institutions, obviously in the UK, we've got NHS. You guys have private healthcare let's say NHS in the UK, private in the US. But oftentimes, new mothers and women will see the medical failings, unfortunately. And I'm not saying it happens all the time, but we need to be aware, and whether it's due to maybe infertility or IVF or birth loss or postnatal care, which is where we're focusing on. What happens when we feel that the system is indifferent, maybe even hostile? How do we deal with that and overcome that? So those are kind of the systemic level conversation I'd like to have, bunched into, again, community and society, but also healthcare. So that's what I'd love to discuss with you today. And then to offer our listeners a bit of hope is, what can we as individuals or as carers, like someone like I myself, to be aware of that, but also to do something about it. So that we're not just leaving everyone with like, this is all a bit of shit. It's like, no, there's awareness, there's education, but there is empowerment in this conversation. So that's the story I'd like to have today. Kayla, anything you want to add to that before we jump in?
Yeah, I mean, there's some legislation going on in certain states in the United States that are quite alarming and draconian and anti-women, but there's still a lot of hope where I think people are being aware. They're not remaining silent anymore. And I think that's what's impressive. Sorry, my daughter is...
That's okay.
down.
She can join. Yeah.
Wait,
Hello.
go down.
That's it.
I had to go to my mom's because my internet at home, I'm in the country, like I'm in a rural area, and it depends on when the
Yeah.
wind blows. If and they wanted to stay the night with me, so that's why she's here.
No
Um,
problem.
but no, I think where my level of hope is, women and even men, they're not remaining silent anymore. When certain legislation is being passed, many Americans are starting to get upset with the healthcare system,
Yeah.
just because it's so expensive and giving birth is so expensive
Mm,
that I'm a firm believer. I think a lot of people around the world agree with me. I think basic healthcare should be a basic human right. It shouldn't be dependent upon your socioeconomic status if you should get antibiotics or not.
I agree. Yeah, it's a shame, but that is the unfortunate reality we're living with. But again, it's how do we, not only through conversation, but conversation being a starting point and educating being a starting point, how do
Yes.
we visibility of that to help things? So let's dive into that first bucket, talking about, you know, what are the societal constructs or dynamics that cause us all to be this Athena, right? So that we're aware of it. And I will talk about, in your book, you do a great job of looking across stratas, across, um, different levels of wealth, different socioeconomic backgrounds, religion, culture, race. And sometimes what that does is there's this illusion of choice, right? Which we talked about beforehand, where we think we've got agency over our path in life or whatever. But obviously there are these big forces that are, directly or indirectly, you know, moving us down a certain path. So one question is like, what are those things? What is it to be aware of? And how do we start to appreciate the impact that those forces have on us as individuals, us as mothers, us or as fathers? Can you talk a bit more about that? And, reference to the book that you talked about. What were some of the key insights or observations that you made in, over your time?
I think being aware of each culture and the history and the complexities behind that, which is it's so complex. We were just talking about the United States and just how diverse we are as a country, and we have almost every language, every religion, every ethnicity represented in this country, and so it is difficult to be fully aware of everything, but I think it's just so important to have some awareness about other people's cultures and their histories and the complexities behind that. So I taught a narrative medicine course this summer to high school students, and
Yeah.
we opened up talking about when the U.S. government administered syphilis in a form of vaccine to 400 Black men and refuse to treat them, and how there is this distrust with the medical community, with the Black community in the United States. And there's like years and years and years of reason to have that distrust. And I had students that had no idea that that had happened. They were completely unaware of just how mistreated a lot of the marginalized groups in the United States have been, and
Yeah.
that opened their eyes. And so I told them that because these are future healthcare or healthcare professionals, some want to be doctors, some want to be nurses. And I said, so if you have a family coming in and they don't know if they want to vaccinate their child or not. And if you know this background, how can you use that history to build that trust and, let them gain trust? And I think it begins with just being aware, confirming people's fears, because that fear is originating from somewhere.
Yeah.
And we're not going to be able to move forward until we acknowledge what happened in the past.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that acknowledgement, I think, is huge for rebuilding that trust with the medical community. Because
Yeah.
that right now, I think, is a massive barrier into moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. That's very helpful. And I think, part of our audience are going to be healthcare professionals and clinicians and women's health specialists that are
Hmm.
treating, obviously, expectant new mothers, and for them to be aware of those biases potentially or those
Uh-huh.
heuristics they have. Um, Thinking about for yourself, because a lot of it we're talking, to new mothers
Mhm.
that will be subject to some of these hidden influences. What in your journey, if you reflect on like what's shaped you, what would you say were some of those, again, if we did it at a societal level, what do you think were some of the biggest influences um, at a society level, whether it was your geography, your culture, your wealth? What were the biggest influences that you think, good or bad, on your life experience and the choices that you think you've made? What have been some of those for you, Kayla? And what helped you to realize, has something helped you to realize what those things are? What do you think those influences have been on you?
Like on a societal level, on a negative part, I think
Mm,
just I am in an area where tradition dictates the culture, and it
right.
is getting better. People are becoming more open to ideas.
Yeah.
Um, it's just tradition. I think we struggle with tradition and challenging traditional norms, and when those traditional norms are challenged, I think there's a lot of fear affiliated with that, uh, when someone is challenging it. I think the negative was I tried so hard to make myself fit in when it wasn't gonna happen, and I think I just had to come to I had to have closure, for
Mm,
myself before I could move on, that I may not physically give birth, and I think that that was hard for me to digest, was I so desperately wanted to carry a child. And,
mm,
and now that I'm older, I think, did I really want that? Or I don't wanna make it sound like I don't love my children. I love my children. I wanna be a mom. I've always wanted to be a mom. But did society have that expectation of me?
exactly. Yes, and that's why I wanted to get it to. Again, and I think you've nailed it in terms of
Like,
the looking at, like, again, this is not you saying you didn't want to, but how much that was my choice, right? This idea of this illusion of choice, which is, did I choose this or do I choose it because that's what everyone else is doing? And look, even
yes.
as a guy, I can appreciate that from my career that I had. I went down into
Mhm,
consult, I became a partner, I did this. I was like, oh, this is great. And then, the typical thing is like, actually, this isn't what I wanted.
mhm,
And then it's kind of like, oh, how, what, so who's making the choices here? This illusion of, whether you call it free will or fate. But going back to what you talked about, you mentioned around the struggle with tradition,
mhm.
which I think I appreciate to some extent. And, again, it's reasons I get it. Tradition equals safety,
Yes.
safe equals the community, fitting in equals safety. And the first thing you want to do in any situation is to be safe. So I
Yes.
can definitely, I think this is not us saying, oh, don't worry about that. You can overcome that. No, there's a reason why since the beginning of time, we've had cultures and we've had tribes and communities and
Mhm,
traditions because they are a shortcut for safety, which we all have to feel in order to do something progressive. I feel that's my view. But obviously, you've raised the point where there can be those tensions. I've felt it in my life. I've got an Asian background. I've grown up in the UK. There are certain tension points where I'm like, it's not usual to question your elders, and it's not usual to do things this way. And we live in a different time, and we have more access to different types of information that might not agree with, oh, back in 100 years ago in rural China, we did this. It's like, well, no, it's a bit different now. So
yes.
I think all of us can relate to your very personal story, which is how do you be aware of that? And again, to start to make more conscious choices and to just appreciate, I think, the impact that your situation has on your life, right? There's one thing that I really appreciate, which is when I got the chance to travel, and people that maybe lived in different countries, is you start to see how different your life is purely as a result of the place you happen to be. If you're lucky to be born in one country, you okay?
Yes.
Uh,
It,
yeah.
like, froze for a second.
Oh, okay. Depending on where you happen to have been born, will
Yes.
have the biggest influence on your life, and that's nothing to do with what you've done.
No.
I know that's just happened when and where you've been born. which is why, again, we go into a deeper conversation. But I think it's just, I can reflect on, the difficulties of overcoming that, being aware of that in the first instance. So I think, one, I just wanted to reflect on what you've talked about, and just being aware of, there aren't many, a lot of the things that we think are choices aren't really choices, right?
No, they're not. And in rural America, it depends on how rural America you are. Like, I'm in a rural area, but I'm not isolated rural. I could not live that way. I'm I'm only 15 minutes from the local grocery store or supermarket. I'm less than an hour away from international cuisine, from local malls. Like, I'm not isolated. But the state of Missouri, 42% of the state lacks labor and delivery units.
Mm.
It's 42% of the counties lack a labor and delivery unit, including counties that I live in. And so when we're looking at healthcare and infant and maternal mortality rate, going back to we can't help where you live. And that is so
Yeah.
true. Um, but as a society, can we help? Like, what type of healthcare access is available to people? And
Yes.
and that's, disheartening when I think I read the statistic, I think, like, 52% of rural communities in the United States, like, not just labor and delivery units, but hospitals are shutting down, and that's
Yeah.
alarming, and people can't help where they live, and now you're essentially denying access to basic healthcare.
Yeah. And that's, I'd love to come into that topic around what people can do, and to be aware of the situation they're in. If I could, I wanted to briefly come back to, you kind of overcoming, if I just briefly go back to the idea of how
Mhm.
you overcame this sense of tradition to be more, have more empowered agency in what you did. Can you pinpoint one or two things that allowed you to overcome that feeling of tradition, or wanting to kind of be more, have more agency over what you do? What were the one or two things that you would say helped you to overcome these kind of contextual factors that have so much of a bearing on you, on our
Yeah.
lives?
I think the first, I lived in poverty, but I'm not generational poverty. And
Yeah.
even though my grandparents, yes, my grandparents lived in poverty, we were in poverty with a middle class mindset.
Okay.
And poverty with not just the middle class mindset, but with the American dream mindset of
Right.
anybody, going from that rags to riches.
Yeah.
And so when I witnessed my mother, who dropped out of high school. She had to get a GED. And then when I was 4 years old, she graduated from the college that I'm currently a professor at. And then she graduated again with her bachelor's degree at a local university when I was 13. That left a huge mark on me she had every reason to kind of give up because the community judged her harshly, and she
Mm.
continued to go forward. And I think it was her where she was like, I may be a high school dropout, I may be a teenage mom, but it doesn't mean I don't have to be successful. And
Yeah.
I
Right.
think that really set the tone of, um, and then when I was going through infertility and I was going through similar judgments, I think that moment was, it's not going to matter what I do. I'm going to be judged no matter what.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it, not only when I was being raised to where achieving a university degree,
Mm.
was kind of a key. And my mom really wanted to make sure that my education was so important
Mm.
because education meant freedom, education meant power. And and I think that, like, her instilling that in me and then being able to travel and get away from Southwest Missouri. Like, I grew up in Southwest Missouri. My parents are divorced, and so I would go to Denver, Colorado, which the culture is completely different, and I was in upper middle class there. And so I kinda had this exposure from a young age. I have a unique background, and
Mm.
I think just knowing I had a support system. I had my mother, I had my stepmom, I had my siblings that I it then it came to where it didn't matter what other people thought.
Great.
And it came to, what do you want? What is best for you? And that helped me overcome some of those struggles. I mean, there were a lot of tears, there were a lot of breakdowns.
Yeah.
'Cause I think that's just normal because you wanna fit in, you do. And I think at some point I just surrendered to the fact that I was exhausted trying to fit in. And when
Yeah.
I surrendered to the idea of, like, I'm gonna do what's best for me, I wanna do what I've always wanted to do, I think that's when there was a level of respect. Like, I didn't get, like, this backlash as much as I thought I was going to.
Yeah.
Um, I've
Yeah.
had young women approach me, some of my former students as teenagers that said, "Thank you for doing what you're doing because now I feel like I can do this." And that
Yeah.
that has been empowering.
Yeah. That's great, Kayla. And I think there's what I glean from your story is, having that role model or a central figurehead, um, who not only kind of help pave the way or show you that possible and that this is okay, but two was a model of success because you're like, she's done it and
Mhm.
she's been through that. That gives me confidence. And not to guarantee you'll be fine, but I'm saying it can be done. And I think it's
Yes.
finding or identifying with someone that has experienced or gone down a path that you may be on, that you can look to as a source of inspiration, or someone that, naturally your mother, like part of her is in you, right? So you can gain a lot of strength from that. I certainly do from my parents when I think about what they went through and what I've now inherited, whether you feel that or other, that's certainly a source of strength for me. So I think, thank you. I think, again, I wanted to really just help to give some ideas for people that are going through a level of adversity and saying, well, hey, how did you overcome that? How have I overcome that? They can be like, okay, let me try and see if I could use something similar to help me on my path. Because as you said, we all need help, and
Yes.
we all find help in different places, right? And so that's great to hear what that was like for you. So I also now want to turn my attention to that second conversation. You were talking previously about the healthcare system,
Mhm.
and we've talked about the impact that society has on us and our community and our families does. There's also the impact of the health institutions, whatever that might be in your country and your local area. Um, you might be lucky to have, like, where the NHS is going is, we talk more about what is called the National Healthcare Service, but now we're talking more in a 10-year plan around this neighborhood healthcare service. So it's more, more localized. And I think that's a good, personally for me, I think my view is that it's a good move because it helps to, you can't have a blanket approach to a whole country, in my
No,
perspective.
no.
There are different pockets of needs based on where you live, right? Because we're so different, even within somewhere as small as the UK compared to America, right? There are going to be
Yeah.
different needs and regionalities. So, where I'd love to go next is thinking about, when you go up against a healthcare system that has its challenges. I mean, it is great. We are lucky to live in the UK where we do have a national healthcare service. I do feel very fortunate to have this. And, my wife, as I keep saying, she's a consultant obstetrician in the NHS. And, but we do recognize that it's very good at treating those acute phases of healthcare, when you are, redlining and you do it, but it isn't as good because it just doesn't have the capacity when you are, um, maybe in a bit of a gray space, you're not feeling great, or maybe sometimes you just fall through the gaps and it's quite fragmented. So at a systemic level, someone that's going up against that can feel like this healthcare system is either one, inaccessible because in the US it's too expensive. It's maybe fragmented because there are too many people involved in this conversation, or it's too slow. I mean, the list can go on, right? But the fact is, you start to feel negated, gaslit, whatever you want to say. Like, you'll find stories to say why it isn't so good. So, what is it? I guess my question goes to one, looking at what that was experience like for you, going back to your story, but then two, what is it we can do about that so that we're not just accepting that this is just how things are? Like, how do we overcome that and use this idea of there'd be Athena to really, you know, turn that awareness into something we can do something about. What's that been like for you, Kayla?
I think it begins at a small level.
Yeah.
and not forgetting that at the end of the day, medicine is about humanity. It's not about profit. It's about humanity. It's about connection. And so many people and the women in my book have experienced medical gaslighting, medical misogyny. I think it takes years, at least in the United States, for endometriosis to be diagnosed in a woman. And that's years and years and years of tremendous amount of pain.
Yes.
But I see pockets of hope. They've just shifted PCOS to PMOS. They're understanding the metabolism component attached to the condition of PCOS, which I think could be quite life-changing for people, for women who are suffering from PCOS. I also see, for one of the first times I think in human history, that at least in the United States, we're starting to study perimenopause. We're starting to study menopause. We're studying women as actual women and not through a man's lens, which they have done for centuries. So there's pockets of hope, but I'm hoping that I see that some medical schools here in the US, there's actually Alice Walton, who is the wealthiest woman, I think, in the world. She founded Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas, which is just like 40 minutes from where I live. She just
Okay.
founded a medical school, the Alice
Right.
Walton School of Medicine. And she constructed her medical school next to the art museum.
Right.
And so much of the medical students' education is also studying art for that for that human component. So we're reducing the gaslighting. We're not dismissing patients. We're understanding humanity.
Mm.
Narrative medicine, I'm working on my doctorate right now in healthcare education, where I'm hoping to get a narrative medicine certificate established at my institution so I can better prepare future healthcare professionals for a diverse group of patients. So that is something that is working. And narrative medicine is starting to, I think, pick up steam in the United States, in that I can't attack pharmaceutical companies. I can't change insurance companies as much as I want to.
Mm.
I said previously, I believe healthcare should be a basic human right. And when you're fighting such strong entities as healthcare companies and pharmaceutical companies that have such financial control over the system, like, that is a hard system to fight against.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
But I can help train doctors and nurses on how to communicate to people who have felt invisible by the medical community.
Yeah. That's great, Kayla. I think it's, you paint a kind of realistic picture
Hmm.
of the good, bad, and the ugly, right? And, there's a broader conversation which we've touched upon in previous conversations around, about the role of AI, which I think paradoxically will make healthcare more human. And I
Yes,
think that makes sense where you allow um, doctors and clinicians and experts the time to connect with people because hopefully the non-clerical stuff and the admin stuff is taken care of in the background. So I see that very much as a story of hope, not because I'm a blind optimist, but I just think that's the only way we're going to have more time for each other. So
absolutely.
that I think is a message of hope. I think so. That's really helpful to hear, Caitlin, and great to hear the work that you're doing in and amongst this area. So if I zoom out from this conversation, um, we've talked in the again under the context of your book, Don't Be an Athena. We talked about what is the societal impact of where we live, the geography, where we just have to be born, and the time we have to be born on us, and the impact that has on our lives and the choices we make, but also the impact at a healthcare level and what we can do about that. So zooming back, we talk a lot about a better start to motherhood, right? That's our vision. We say that our goal for the motherhood clinic is that we want to give every mother a better start to motherhood. Given everything we talked about, right? The lot that you're born with in life that puts you at a certain point leading into motherhood, and then also the choice that you make. What would you say in answer to that? What does a better start to motherhood look like for you then? So if you were talking to one of our listeners, what would you advise them? Or what would be your message for what does a better start to motherhood look like given your experience? What would you say to that?
I just think about everything that I have gone through and how, depending on where you live and just your profession. I
Yeah.
felt like with me, and despite being a professional and having health insurance, I felt like I had finite amount of resources to motherhood. I did not have with both kids, I went back to work within 7 weeks of giving birth. I
Wow.
didn't have a night nurse. I didn't, I mean, my prenatal care was taken care of, that was fine. It was the postnatal, and I feel like depending on where you are, we need to do a better job of postnatal care, which I appreciate what you do because I think you do a lot of work with the postnatal care. But what I learned, because I think society told me that I had to do everything on my own, that I wasn't
Mm.
being a good mom if I wasn't up when my child was up and I was feeding my child 24/7. I felt like I had to do everything on my own. Change my daughter's diapers, make sure they were fed, make sure they were bathed, make sure I'm changing their clothes. And so with my second child, I did a better job of admitting when I needed help, of I need to sleep. I need to have family members come in and help take care of this infant, and admitting that I need help and I need sleep doesn't mean that I am a failure as a mother.
Great. Good. Good. That's a very clear message. So, just admitting that you don't have to do everything. And
No.
when
And I
that's
don't think
great.
we're designed to do it all by ourselves. We're
Absolutely.
not. And it's okay to, and if you don't have the family structure, maybe you have a friend structure or a community structure of saying, I desperately
Yeah.
need to have help. Or when your body is sick and somebody needs to take care of an infant, you can find someone to reach out to and to help take care of your kids. And you're not a failure.
Great. And that's a very important message, I think, for everyone that we can't say enough. So thank you, Kayla. I really appreciate the work you're doing, this conversation, the TED Talk. Again, we'll link that all in the book, obviously. So thank you, Kayla. We have one more conversation that we'll have. And it's really kind of summing all of this up. We
Yes.
talked about the key themes, but the next conversation will be about breaking that generational trauma. And I think that again becomes through awareness and education, we can therefore let go or break the cycle of generational trauma, which I think is, exactly the story of Medusa. So again, I look forward to that conversation. Kayla, thank you very much for your time again. And we'll speak in the next discussion.
Yay.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.